Hey everybody, I'm Marc Bates. I'm a metabolic health coach, and today's topic is carbohydrate dogma within sports nutrition. This is a fascinating subject. For decades, athletes have loaded carbs before competition as gospel. New research reveals this ritual may be based on incomplete understanding of human metabolism and performance. The conventional wisdom has been clear and seemingly unassailable. High carbohydrate diets are essential for optimal athletic performance, especially for those who are in endurance sports, right? Running, track and field, uh, if you're playing football, or if you're basketball or tennis, stuff like that, right? We need long term endurance. This belief has shaped training tables, pre competition meals, and mid event fueling strategies for generations of athletes. But what if this fundamental assumption is only partially correct? Okay, the carbohydrate paradigm under scrutiny. Dr. Andrew Kutnick, the handsome guy you saw on the previous slide, and his research team have published findings that challenge the foundation of sports nutrition dogma. Their work suggests that after proper adaptation, athletes on low carbohydrate ketogenic diets can perform just as well as those following traditional high carbohydrate protocols. The implications are profound for elite competitors and recreational athletes, offering a new avenue for performance enhancement. In a groundbreaking study, Dr. Kutnick found that highly trained triathletes performed equally well on a ketogenic diet compared to a high carb diet during strenuous endurance exercise after a 6-week adaptation period, challenging long held beliefs in sports nutrition. What we saw was that when comparing this low glycemic environment of a low carb diet versus a high glycemic environment of a high carb diet over 6 weeks, if you adhere to the diet, there was no difference in performance in these highly trained competitive triathletes, explains Dr. Kutnick. This finding directly challenges the prevailing theory that high carb diets are necessary for high end performance across the exercise spectrum. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, this study only tracked the athletes over a short period of time. Okay? And one of the things we're getting, not through studies, but through just, uh, ancillary evidence of, people who are telling us their experiences, is that especially for really long distance, long endurance sports, triathletes, ultra marathoners, people like that, those that have switched to carnivore are claiming that they are receiving just numerous benefits in not ever hitting the wall, not ever running out of energy, being able to go and go and go on these especially long distance ones. So remember, this study, that we're reporting on, was a short-term study, not a long-term study, but it was long enough to disprove the common dogma. Okay, that's the important thing to remember. The adaptation timeline revelation. Previous studies showing performance decrements in low carb diets may have missed the crucial factor, adaptation time. Most of those studies lasted 2 weeks or less, and that's important. Dr. Kutnick's research identified that a minimum of 4-week adaptation period to a ketogenic diet is required to normalize metabolic homeostasis, glycemic control, and exercise performance. Okay, they're actually suggesting maybe 6 weeks would be better, but 4 weeks is the minimum. That's why when you're switching to a ketogenic or a carnivore diet, I normally suggest at least a 4-week time period to ease into that diet, because your body has to adapt to being fat adapted. Okay? A lot of evidence that has shown a decrement to ketogenic diets has often looked at these diets in less than 4 weeks in duration, notes Dr. Kutnick. Multiple lines of evidence illustrate that 4 weeks may be important for achieving certain metrics of metabolic homeostasis post diet initiation. This adaptation timeline explains why many earlier studies with shorter adaptation periods showed performance decrements on low carb diets. And once again, let's take this sports study and bring it into the real world for average everyday people, what holds true for an athlete should hold true as well for us, for normal people. Even though I don't run marathons, I used to do some long distance walking, long distance walking stuff, but it applies. If athletes need a period of adaptation, average everyday people need a period of adaptation, and this goes for any diet shift, right? Major change in the type of foods and the volume of foods that you're eating. Don't expect it to go like day one instantaneous. You want to ease into these dietary shifts because your gut microbiome is used to getting a certain amount of food and a certain type of food, and you want to change that. And your body's used to processing certain types of foods. So just keep this in mind. This applies to sports enthusiasts, right, and long-term athletes, but it also applies to everyday people. We can take this science and look into our normal everyday actions. Okay? Record-breaking fat oxidation. Now this is important. Perhaps most surprising was the discovery of extraordinary fat utilization during high-intensity exercise among keto-adapted athletes. The research demonstrated record high fat oxidation rates. For technical, it's 1.58 grams a minute. That's a lot. Occurring at 86% VO2 max. That's 86% of your capacity to actually breathe and process oxygen. That's working very, very hard. In athletes following a ketogenic diet, even more remarkably, 30% of subjects exceeded the 1.85 gram a minute level, the highest levels reported in the scientific literature at high exercise intensities. And this is important because they said that you couldn't get that high, but they never studied it properly. This finding contradicts the traditional crossover concept, a widely accepted theory that suggests fat oxidation becomes minimal at higher exercise intensities, typically above 70% of VO2 max, right? And remember, 70% of VO2 max means working very hard. 80% and 85% is working extremely hard, right? That's like running marathon speed if you're a marathon runner, right? Olympic speed. So you're working very hard at that level and getting record high fat oxidation, which they said couldn't happen, right? The metabolic flexibility demonstrated by these athletes suggests our understanding of fuel utilization during exercise needs significant revision. And in corollary, our ability to utilize fuel utilization in normal everyday life also has to be looked at, right? Remember, we can take these sports studies and apply them to ourselves and see how it works. The auto industry learns a lot from the F1 racers and the IndyCar racers and all that on how engines perform and tires perform and stuff. It relates to how they design new features into cars. Doesn't mean that you're driving an Indy car, but they learn stuff at that high performance level, which is at the very cutting edge of performance that they can use in everyday stuff. Same thing applies here. These athletes are at the cutting edge. They're at the very edge of human ability. And what we learn from them is how, and that stuff will and can apply to us later on in how we run with our life. Okay? So there's a reason we want to go into this. Okay, so this is Dr. Andrew Kutnick. You saw his picture a little bit earlier. He's the lead researcher behind this challenge, and he did a great job with this one because, once again, everyone said it couldn't be done. No one even thought to try and do this. In addition to Dr. Kutnick, there's one of my mentors who I studied under, Dr. Tim Noakes. He's from South Africa. He coaches, provides nutritional coaching to several of the rugby teams around the world and long distance runners. And he's a favorite among the ultra marathoner crowd now because his experience and work in ketogenic and extremely low carb diets and how it helps ultra marathoners is important. So these are the two main people who put this study together, right? All right, what this means, the hypoglycemia hypothesis. The research team's follow-up study revealed something even more surprising. So this is a good study. They did the original 6-week study, then they followed it up, right, to see if the results held. Exercise-induced hypoglycemia is the primary limiting factor in endurance performance rather than glycogen depletion. This challenges decades of sports nutrition dogma, focusing primarily on glycogen as the critical factor, right? And if any of you run long distance, belong to a running club, you see all these guys talking about having these gel packs, especially for the marathoners, where they absorb, they try to choke down these foul-tasting things to get extra glycogen, extra glucose into their system during the race. Well, there's a limit to how much of that you can take, and what they're finding is that just doesn't matter. You don't need to force down this stuff for performance. Okay? When Dr. Kutnick provided minimal carbohydrate supplementation, in this case only 10 grams an hour, that's very little, right? If you use the standard of 4 calories a gram for carbohydrates, right, that's only 40 calories worth of supplementation an hour. That's nothing, okay? It eliminated exercise-induced hypoglycemia and improved performance by 22% in athletes following both low-carb and high-carb diets. Okay, so just the smallest amount of sugar for these top-performing marathon athletes gave them a performance boost. They don't need to carb down. You just need a teeny bit. Okay? This finding is revolutionary because it challenges the conventional wisdom that a much higher carb intake, 60 to 100 grams an hour, is necessary for optimal performance. And 120 is about that maximum you can take in an hour, right? And your body can process. But you figure, once again, let's take that back to what you may be comfortable knowing. At 4 calories a gram, 120 grams is 480, almost 500 calories. And that's like one of those big gel packs. And you can't process that. And what happens is, what Dr. Kutnick found is that you don't need to take that much carbs to improve your performance. You only need really a little bit, just the amount you might get in a sip or two, a little cup of like a Gatorade or something. It doesn't take much. What if you're burning fat and your energy is coming from fat? All you need is that little bit of tip to just really jumpstart the muscles. Okay, we're only giving athletes 3.4 grams approximately every 20 minutes. So very, very minimal levels, says Dr. Kutnick. Not only was it able to mitigate exercise-induced hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, but it led to a 22% performance increase in prolonged exercise in these athletes. The performance improvement was nearly identical regardless of whether athletes were on a low-carb or high-carb diet, suggesting the critical factor was preventing hypoglycemia, not maximizing glycogen, right? And once again, think about it. If your body is burning fat for the most part, and that's what you're running on, and you've got lots of, even the most lean athlete has got lots of body fat that he can burn for energy. Well, if you're at an elite athlete, all you're looking for that little tweak to get that extra 1-2% in your speed in your step. It only takes 10 grams an hour to get that of carbs. It doesn't take a whole bunch of carb loading and having your cells saturated with glycogen. Okay, so that's very important. Okay, carbohydrates as a performance drug. Now this is where I follow along with Dr. Tim Noakes, and I did several classes with him. World-renowned exercise physiologist Dr. Tim Noakes, a study co-author, has proposed a provocative theory. Carbohydrates may function more like a drug during exercise, with central stimulant effects in the brain beyond just their metabolic role. So we know that the brain can get addicted to carbohydrates. So having excess carbohydrates may actually be just a drug-induced phenomenon, not a real metabolic phenomenon. Dr. Noakes proposes that carbohydrates may function more like a drug during exercise, with central stimulant effects in the brain beyond their metabolic role. He suggests that carbohydrates' main metabolic effect is to prevent blood glucose from falling, but their primary effect on performance is on the brain, providing a psychological lift that can enhance performance. So it's not physical here. This is mental. Your brain thinks you need this, and a little bit of carbohydrate gives you that little boost. It's like you get a little hit. It's like getting hit with caffeine, right? Take a little coffee, you get a little spark in your brain power. This perspective helps explain why even small amounts of carbohydrates can significantly improve performance, and why techniques like carbohydrate mouth rinsing without even swallowing can enhance performance. This is what they did, right? They took their athletes, and as they're running, right, they would ask them to take the Gatorade-like sports drink and just swish it around their mouth and spit it out. And that little boost, just that tiny amount that would be absorbed through, the tissues in your mouth without even swallowing, did everything you needed. And this is why Dr. Noakes says, hey, what this is it's your brain responding to just a little bit of carbohydrate, right? Like a performance drug, and saying, okay, great, let's go, let's kick it in. And think of it like caffeine once again. If you drink coffee, right, you don't quite feel there until you have that first couple sips of coffee, and it's not a lot of caffeine by that point, but it's just enough that your brain goes, okay, time to wake up. Same thing happens here. Okay, so this can apply to our normal lives when you're thinking about, oh, I need carbohydrates. No, you don't. In your normal life, you don't. You just the normal metabolic effects of eating food is probably more than enough, and you don't want to feed a drug habit. Okay. Okay. So health implications beyond performance. The research uncovered another surprising findings with potential long-term health implications. And keep this in mind. 30% of seemingly healthy endurance athletes following high carbohydrate diets showed continuous glucose monitoring values consistent with prediabetes. Right? That's a key one here. If they were carb loading all this time to get their performance up, they were actually hurting their metabolism, because prediabetes is the next step is type 2 diabetes. They were moving into insulin resistance, which would long term hurt their performance. So their best bet as an athlete would be to become fat adapted, eat a extremely low carbohydrate ketogenic or carnivore diet, and then when they're racing, when they're running the race, just take a small swig of like that sports drink, just to give them that little bit of carbohydrate they need to boost that performance that day, not to use that as a normal training mechanism. Okay? So this suggests that the traditional high carb approach for athletes may have unintended metabolic consequences over time. We tracked these individuals over 31 days on a diet using continuous glucose monitoring, explains Dr. Kutnick. It showed that their glycemic values were in line with prediabetes, including fasting levels values in 30% of them. And that's a significant portion of these athletes. Interestingly, the same 30% of athletes who showed pre-diabetic glucose patterns on high-carb diets were the hyper-responders to the ketogenic diet. During the study, these individuals experienced the most significant drop in blood glucose, suggesting a low-carb approach may be particularly beneficial for those with metabolic health concerns. So once again, just like with everything else, you do have to, your body is very unique. Everybody's very unique in the way you process food, the way you handle it, how your hormones are responding to things. So watch yourself. But if you're trying to get peak performance on something, you're going to look for these things. Take that back to the real world. That just means overall, well, we're not looking for peak performance to run a marathon. We don't want to get prediabetes. We don't want to have that problem like we're eating like these athletes used to eat. and we want to go to that extreme low carb ketogenic diet and or carnivore, because that's where your body was designed to run long term. And the long term race is more than just a 1 day race. It is the way you're running the rest of your life. Okay, so rethinking sports nutrition fundamentals. These findings don't necessarily mean all athletes should abandon carbohydrates. And remember, this is a very individualized thing, and athletes who are especially working at the edge of their performance capability, so these are elite athletes, they have to be very careful with what they're doing. Instead, they suggest that our understanding of fuel utilization during exercise is more complex than previously thought, and that goes for everyday life as well. The research opens up options for athletes who may not respond well to high carb approaches or have metabolic health concerns. And if you're not a peak athlete, but let's say you're just an average everyday person, 70% or more of the average everyday people have metabolic health concerns. So this just means, as a go-to thing for everyday people, you should be really opting off for a ketogenic, extremely low carbohydrate, carnivore, no carb type of a diet, because that's the way your body was designed. Okay? What this is telling us is that you have options, says Dr. Kutnick. You don't need a high carb diet if it doesn't fit you. If you're someone who's struggling with prediabetes, the health considerations of a dietary approach like low carb diet to lower glucose should be predominant. The idea that athletes must pound carbohydrates before and during events may be unnecessarily restrictive for many. Okay? Practical applications and future directions. For athletes considering these findings, several practical points emerge. Adaptation matters. If transitioning to a low-carb approach, allow at least 4 to 6 weeks for complete metabolic adaptation before assessing performance impacts. For regular everyday people, if you're making this change from eating the standard American diet to a ketogenic, low-carb diet, very low-carb diet, adaptation matters. Give yourself 4 to 6 weeks as well. Okay? Your gut microbiome takes time to adjust. Give it that time. Minimal carb supplementation may be sufficient. Rather than consuming 60 to 120 grams of carbs per hour during endurance events. Remember, we're just talking about for especially marathon runners, peak runners during the event. Much smaller amounts, 10 grams an hour, may prevent hypoglycemia and support performance. Hypoglycemia should not be a problem for you on a daily, everyday process, right? Your body will, through gluconeogenesis, produce more than enough blood sugar to keep you out of hypoglycemia, okay, as a general rule. But we're applying what we're learning from peak athletes to our everyday life. Individual metabolic responses vary. The 30% of athletes showing pre-diabetic glucose patterns on high-carb diets suggests that a personalized approach tailored to individual metabolic needs may be beneficial. I would say will certainly be beneficial, in my opinion, okay? Especially if you're not a peak athlete, right? For everyday person, what you eat might have a big impact on your life metabolically. And consider health alongside performance. This is a key one. Different dietary approaches, potential long-term metabolic consequences should factor into athletes' nutrition strategies. Future research will likely explore the minimum effective dose of carbohydrate supplementation during different types of exercise. Individual factors that predict optimal dietary approaches and long-term health outcomes of various sports nutrition strategies. Now, what I'll tell you, once again, this is something that Dr. Tim Noakes has just released, some studies he's done. The sports teams, professional athletes, especially in rugby, that he has been working with, that they've found that going to an extremely low carbohydrate ketogenic diet and or carnivore has helped these athletes perform longer, harder, and be stronger throughout the game. And if it applies to an athlete, just tone it down a little bit and see how it applies to you. You don't necessarily need that 99.9% performance level for, the 4 hours of a marathon. But what you need for the rest of your day, well then, I would just get rid of the carbs completely with that. Okay? There's a new era of metabolic flexibility. So Dr. Kutnick's research doesn't invalidate carbohydrates as a performance fuel. Okay? I'm not telling you not to take, especially if you're an elite athlete running marathons. I'm not telling you not to take a little bit of carbohydrates. What I'm saying is it expands our understanding of human metabolic flexibility and provides evidence that multiple fueling strategies can support high level performance. So go back to what he said. If you're fat adapted, you're in a ketogenic diet, you're doing it for at least 6 weeks, so you're fat adapted before you seriously train and try to run in a marathon, right? It takes virtually nothing to give you that peak performance hit, right? 10 grams an hour of carbohydrates is virtually nothing. You can get that just swishing your mouth with a sports drink, as Dr. Tim Noakes, Professor Tim Noakes has proven, right? The idea here is that you don't have to endanger your long-term health, right, by eating lots of carbohydrates. All you need is just a teeny bit if you're a peak athlete to get over, right? This opens up choices for athletes to make decisions not just about performance but about health, concludes Dr. Kutnick. This research provides liberating evidence that strict adherence to high carbohydrate regimes may not be necessary for optimal performance for the 99% of athletes who aren't elite competitors. Okay. The body seems to be far more adaptable than sports nutrition dogma has acknowledged. For the past half century, as our understanding of metabolism continues to evolve, so will our approaches to fueling human performance with increasingly personalized strategies that consider immediate performance, goals, and long-term health outcomes. Okay, hope you like that one. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment. Let me know what you think, and appreciate paying attention. Thank you.